Hey guys, how y'all doing? Thank you for showing up. I was like, oh my God, it's the last presentation of the day. Like nobody's going to be here, and I'm going to be like, oh God, that hurts. So thank you, I appreciate it. We're going to talk about synthetic fraud. My name is Mike Cook. I'm VP of Fraud Products at the company. Been at Socure for about 2.5 years. Been in the industry for about 37 years. So I know I don't look like it, whatever. But really excited about talking about synthetic fraud with you guys. And I do want to make sure this is the last thing of the day. Let's make it more interactive. You guys have a question, don't wait to the end. Just blurt it out, right? So before I start, who knows about synthetic fraud? Okay, so not that many people. Okay, good. So I can tell you anything. I can tell you stuff that's wrong. It doesn't really matter. I know synthetic fraud really well. Quick story. I was doing fraud investigations like 3 in the morning just because I couldn't get enough fraud. And this is about in 2003. And I was looking through a bunch of applications that had these weird similarities. They had, different names. They had like John Johnson, and then it was Johnson John, and then they had these social securities numbers that were like 9831, 9832, 9833, but they all have the same address, they connect. So it really kind of like, it intrigued me, and so I started doing a ton of analysis, ended up writing a white paper, and called it synthetic fraud. So I coined the phrase back in like 2003, and since that time have paid a lot of attention to it just because it is really cool. It's bad, I hate it, it needs to go away, and I think we could kill it by 2026. I really do, because the technology is there. So, but I want to talk to you about synthetic fraud and how it might impact your businesses, because I don't think you may be aware of what's going on inside your bases. So we'll talk about this. Who's got independent contractors or that they work with? You do. So do you have synthetic fraud? So I hate to say it. Who's got customers in their accounts, right, that they service? Right? If you have customers, you have synthetic fraud, right? If you are an insurance provider, your companies have synthetic fraud. So everybody has synthetic fraud. We know, like even if you think about banking, right, and how good banking does at trying to stop synthetic fraud, in deposit accounts today, 1 to 4% of open, active bank accounts are synthetic identities. And it doesn't matter if you're a big traditional bank that we all know, you're at 4%. It doesn't matter if you're a fintech, right, a sizable fintech that we all, we know names, right? You're above 1%. It's crazy how much synthetic fraud there is in the U.S. system, right? And why would you do that? Why would you open up a synthetic fraud in a bank account? Because you want to be a money mule. You want to, scam people, move the money through, send it internationally. You have to do all these things, right? So synthetic fraud is a lot about what's the opportunity and what's my motive. And so we're going to talk about that. Socure, just real quick pitch. So we're identity verification end-to-end, which means we can help you at the front end to understand what is synthetic, what's third party, what is fraud that's trying to enter my front door, right? We can help you in account takeover efforts. If you've got somebody who's trying to credential stuff and they are going in, they find that they can get into your account, they're changing information because you may OTP them on a cell phone, the customer to verify them, so they'll change the cell phone number, right? So we can help with risk scoring on phone numbers, on email addresses, and those kinds of things. We also do a bunch of KYC stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference in KYC and fraud, because I've heard the term KYC used quite a bit over the last couple days. And then we do predictive document validation, which is basically, hey, let me take a live selfie. Let me take a picture of the driver's license, let me validate you, which is really the best way to do validation these days. So, okay, so we're going to give a quick definition on synthetic fraud, right? The simplest definition of synthetic is if I create an identity to get financial gain, that is not a real identity. It's a fake identity, right? And that has been the definition of synthetic fraud for 22, 23 years, right? And it wasn't until the Fed got together, I got to sit on that task force. We built a definition. It took about 3 months because it was government. We could have done it in a week, probably could have done it in an afternoon, but it took 3 months. And so this was the definition that we created. And the couple things that are most important for y'all to understand is there are 2 kinds of synthetic fraud, right? There's fabricated, there's manipulated. Fabricated is a completely fake identity, right? And I'll show you how you can create a great fabricated identity or how you can create a terrible fabricated identity. So we'll talk about that. Part of this is to help you fund your companies by doing synthetic fraud after this. The other thing is manipulated synthetic fraud, and that's basically you're a consumer, and there's two types of you, okay? There's one consumer who has seen hard times. They went through a divorce. They had bad economic times through COVID, right? And so they need to manipulate their identity in a way that you can't find the old credit report because it's so bad, right? And so they can manipulate it, and once they do get a new identity, they will pay you. And this happens a lot in subprime car, right? Auto finance, because a lot of people need a car to get back and forth to work. So they'll use manipulated. So it's interesting. Some of the synthetic fraud isn't actually that bad. Then there's fraud for a living, which is, and we all know this kind of person, somebody who likes to spend too much money. They live paycheck to paycheck. They live beyond paycheck to paycheck, get really, really bad credit, and then they can't use credit anymore. And so those people will manipulate their identity so that they can go open more credit, and eventually they're going to go bad again. And those are, that's credit repair, sorry. And a lot of what I'm going to show you, you'll learn online. We did a ton of analysis on synthetic fraud, and this is just last in October. And one of the things that we wanted to find out, we wanted to see who it was attacking. I'm not going to cover that with you today because we have so little time. But if you think about synthetic fraud, you as the bad actor, put yourself in the bad actor's shoes. You get to create the identity any way you want. You can create a male, you can create a female, you can create a young person, an older person, right? And we'll talk about why you would do it in a certain way. So we did this study, and what we found is that the average synthetic identity tries to look like the average American, right? The #1 synthetic name, right, is Michael Smith. He's a white guy. He's 31. He uses T-Mobile, right? And all these other characteristics that you can see, but this was the #1 synthetic identity that was being used across a bunch of different industries, right? And so we looked at other things that were unique about the synthetic identities, and they use surnames as well that are, on the top 10 list. So they use surnames and they use names, right? You can look at SSA's list, top 100 names over the last X many years, right? And they're basically using those names that are like top 100. They're using the top surnames too. So it's interesting, right? When people are creating synthetics, they are trying to kind of hide within the population. And that was a little bit of a surprise to us, right? So that's a quick overview on synthetic. Again, y'all have questions, blurt them out. Don't worry about going to the end. Now, we're going to do the fun part. Let's create a synthetic identity, right? And the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to use technology I've borrowed from Marketplace Risk. Right? Go to the old school whiteboard, right? And so I'm going to ask a couple of people. I've been told I can't go in front of this line. I'm real hyper, so I always want to go in front and get closer to y'all. But so let me think about this. I need a last name. Somebody give me a last name. How do I spell that? Okay. And then I need a first name. What's your first name? Oh, Paul. Paul, okay. Paul, okay. Okay, Paul. So here we go. This is the first name. Now, I'm smart, right? So I understand synthetic identity. If I didn't understand synthetic identity, I'd be like, sweet, that name will work for me, right? I have to have my motive, because I want to tell you why do I want to create this synthetic identity, I have felonies. Not really, but I have a felony, right? And I want to go and get a job in one of your marketplaces, right? But I know that you do not hire felons, right? But I want a job. So I'm going to change it. So I've got to have a male name, right? Because I'm assuming, because I'm a smart fraudster, I have looked at exactly what you do to onboard new people, right? I know exactly what you do. I know it better than you guys know it, right? That's how smart these fraudsters are. So, and I'm so sorry about the name. I can't use that name because I know when you put me through validation, you're going to take a picture of me, right? And I look like I have a more American-sounding last name, right? So I need to have a more of an American-sounding last name. Who's got another last name that I could use? Who? Kaiser. Like Kaiser Sose? Love it. Kaiser. Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, so I'm going to use this name, right? And again, I want to create a synthetic identity that's going to do a really good thing for me, right? I want to, I lost this. I really want to get that job with you guys, right? So what's the other thing I need? I need an email account, okay? So I could easily, and we've all done this, I can go to Gmail, Yahoo, Hotmail, MSN, it puts something in and go, okay, I'm Paul Kaiser, right? And I'll get back Paul Kaiser 463-8912543 dot, at gmail.com, right? I'm smart. I know a model will catch that. If you use a randomly generated email, right, that has that string and uses this name up front, that is what synthetic fraudsters do, right? Because they want to make it look like that email is really theirs. So I'm not going to do that because I'm smart. I'm going to go out here to this place where it's a marketplace. We're talking about a marketplace. And they sell verified emails that are vintage, right? So these emails have been around for a long time, right? Why is that important? It beats the model. Not all the time, right? Right, email greater than 180 days. Thank you, Will Minton. Let me guess, you work for Socure. So if the email is older than 180 days, the risk goes down. If it's a new email, the risk goes up, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go buy a vintage email to use, right? I get to buy it, I get to use it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use .com. Okay, so I bought this off the site. That's actually my email, so if y'all want to get in contact with me, mike.cook@socure.com. All right, I also need an address, right? So then what kind of an address do I want to use? I want to use a deliverable address, right? Because if I just make up an address that is not deliverable, what's going to happen, Will? It's going to fire up a reason code that says this is not a deliverable address, right? It's going to go into the model. So what I want to do is use an address that's near me, right? It doesn't matter what address it is. It could be my next door neighbor. It could be someone that has an Airbnb that lives down the street. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use an address. I'm just going to make a short one. I live in Wimberley, Texas. Right, so I'm going to use that address. And it's right down the street from me. Why am I going to do that? Because when I go and start applying for credit and I start trying to get my job with you, my IP address is going to show up in this area, right? If my IP address, let's say I pick a New York address and I live in Texas, when I file the application to get on to work with you, right? The IP is going to be further than 100 miles away, and it's going to kick off a bad variable, right? It's not one variable that's going to kick it off, right? It's a variable, it's going to give it a bad score, so it's going to increase the risk of the score, right? So there's that. And again, you want to do it close to home, right? There's people online, again, another marketplace, where they sell verified phone numbers, right? So I can go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and say that I went ahead and bought this because I want to do well. That is, by the way, SpongeBob's phone number. If anybody, I don't know if anybody is aware of that. And I'm going to use my area code. And why is that? Because again, it's my area code, it's closer, right? And then of course, what's one of the most important things, right? Your social security number, right? I certainly don't want to use mine. I don't want to barely change it because it could get matched up, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a CPN, right? CPNs were consumer privacy numbers. They came out like 20 years ago. It was basically, hey, this is for a privacy thing, right? You shouldn't give out your social, give out a CPN, right? The issue is it's all fraud, right? And I think this is too far away for you guys to read, and I appreciate y'all moving up. But I mean, to establish an issue in a CPN, we will need your name, date of birth, we'll put a date of birth here, an address you've never used before. Why address you've never used before? Because it'll tie to a credit profile. Now, so I'm using credit bureau and credit profile a lot, right? But the issue is people don't realize how much credit bureau data drives everything we do, right? Any identity verification solution that's out there that's verifying, guess what it uses? Credit header data, right? All the information above all the financial trade lines, right? Your criminal background checks, guess what they use? Credit bureau data, right? So all I got to do is establish myself at a bureau, right? And this is giving you the way to do it in that second paragraph down, right? You don't want to link your address. That's another reason why this is not my address, right? So I'm going to use a CPN. Now, I'm smart enough, I can just use a randomly issued SSN. So back in July 2011, interesting fact, I got to work with these academics on SSNs, and we started predicting SSNs pretty close to what your SSN should be, what your SSN should be. And so we wrote a paper, and the government read that, and they moved to randomly generated SSNs about a year later. So in the past, your social security number said where you were born, when you were born, right? So you could basically easily say, here's the first 3, here's the second 2 digits, right? The last 4 you had to guess. There was ways to do it. So we've moved to randomly generated SSN. So you can go and you can find a randomly generated SSN, you can do that, right? So I'm just gonna use, this is considered, let's say it's a randomly generated SSN. I am a fan of privacy, so I'm not gonna write a good social that's up there. Interesting fact, SSA doesn't use 666. Thought that was odd when I found out. And the 2 numbers in the middle, 0, 0, those are not something done. Okay, so I'm gonna go back just a second. And again, the reason I'm trying to show you this is show you how easy it is to build one and show you the characteristics that a smart person will do that will surpass most everything you might be doing today unless you have a synthetic fraud model up at the front, right? That's why I always say, you have synthetics, right? Because if you're not using synthetic model, you're not gonna catch it. So, okay, so this is a synthetic identity. Hooray. So what, right? You can't do anything with it. So remember, the credit report is what drives all of the value to create an identity. So you'd imagine it's hard to establish a synthetic identity at the Bureau, right? We all think that would be pretty hard, right? It is simply as easy as 1, 2, 3, right? All you have to do, and this is unbelievable, and you guys aren't gonna believe it, because it's unbelievable, but it's true, is apply for credit 3 times, right? And honestly, you know, if you get credit, great, you know, what a surprise. But all you want to do is if you apply for credit 3 times, then the Bureau takes this identity, right, and puts it out on the credit report. It's got no trade lines underneath it, right? It is a credit header, to use the proper term. Your background check company buys the credit header data. This synthetic identity we created is in it, right? Your KYC company that does identity verification for you buys the credit header. This is in it, right? So we together have just created a synthetic identity. We've established that we have information, right? And we're in there, right? So, you know, you say, congratulations, you've created a credit report, so what? Right, so what? Right, and you think about what you can do with that. Criminal background checks, and let me tell you a little quick story here. Criminal background checks use the data like we were just talking about, right? Okay, part of what I do is I have a fraud investigation unit. Love them. Great guys. All they do all day long is look at data, trying to understand if it's third party, first party fraud, credit bureaus, whatever it might be, right? And so I went to them and I said, do me a favor. Give me a manipulated synthetic identity, right, which is a consumer that has changed their identity. Give me a fabricated synthetic. Make sure they are fabricated. Make sure they are manipulated, right? And there's a way to do that. 100% guarantee it's synthetic, right? I didn't run it through a big criminal background check company because it took me a while and I wanted to prep for this conference. But I ran it through an online one, right? I did a criminal background check. Guess what I got back? Validated it, no criminal background. You know why there's no criminal background? Because they're not real. But remember, I have felonies. Not in real life. But I have felonies, right? So here I am now. I come into you and say, I want to be a worker for you. I want to drive a car. I want to ship things. I want to deliver stuff to consumers, right? I have passed the background check. Let me come in, right? I want to go in and I want to get coupons. Let me just put 10,000, 100,000 identities through your process, right? Let me just get all this. Let me get all of it. Let me beat your policies, right? So that is something you can do. So I just ran 2 through it and both of them passed. So again, we do have customers, right, in this space. We've 1,500 customers. But so in this space, for gig, when we find synthetic identities, so it's not, hey, 75% of independent consultants are synthetic. When we find them, 75% are fabricated, okay? Fabricated synthetics are the worst. There is no good reason to fabricate an identity, right? So 75%, when we analyze, it doesn't mean there's 75%, right? But when we analyze, 75% of those are fabricated. And why does that matter, right? We talked about Socure does document validation, right? So this is a good example for manipulated. So I wanted to kind of take you through what a manipulated thing would do, right? So this is a consumer, this guy here, Billy Bob Faker. He's created a fake identity. He's got a bureau. It's a new bureau. It's kind of thin, right? So now he's gonna go and buy a car, right? So he goes and buys a car, and then they validate. So how do you think every car dealer validates the consumer? Credit bureau, and yep, they don't even do that. They just want to look at it. And then they go take a copy of it. Yeah, they take a copy. Now this one here, in a manipulated situation, it's his real driver's license. That's his real date of birth, his real address, right? There's no social on it. So in a situation like that, the subprime auto guy is looking at a credit report that is not Billy Bob Faker's. If he had the right social and the right data, he would see Billy Bob has bad credit. So you underwrite the risk, right? So this is what happens too in y'all's environments, right? Manipulated, this is what happens as well. So this is why it matters. You want to know not just that it's synthetic, an identity synthetic, but what am I going to do to step them up? What am I going to do to validate them, right? If it's fabricated and you guys are bringing them in to be an independent consultant, validate the social. And when you validate the social on a W-2, on a tax return, right? Don't just take a piece of paper, make a copy, say I did it, because it is so easy to manipulate that data, right? Even a PDF, right? There's companies that will look at the underlying code in the PDF to see, wow, he changed his social, right? So you have, when you're looking at synthetic identities, you want to know, like, why? What kind of synthetic it is. So unfortunately, and this may or not matter, right? From a independent contractor perspective, it doesn't matter. Maybe you want to look at their credit, maybe not. Certainly background check. But if what we've got here is we built a synthetic that looks like a real person that will validate through employment checks, that will validate through KYC checks, right? But if I wanted to get credit, I need more than just my identity information up there, right? So, whoopee, I got a 540 score. I can't get a lot of credit. Not that great, right? I can go from a subprime score on our identity that we created, and I can get it to a prime score in a month, right? And all I have to do is go online and read about it. The recipe is out there, right? So let's boost our score. So we have this identity, right? It's out there. We're going to use this. We're going to apply for credit at this place here, Credit Strong. There are companies that are out there. Some are there's credit builder products that are out there. Some of them are legit credit builder products, and they use us because they don't want synthetic data in there. They don't want to be used to increase synthetic activity, right? So there's some credit builder products that are really, really legit. So I'm not shooting down credit builder products. There are others that are not legit, right? And so basically on this product here, you can see, right, Pedro's very happy with his score. This product here, I can basically sign up. I can pay you so much per month. They're going to save that money for you. So they're creating a savings vehicle, but they're going to report to the bureau that you've got a trade line of $5,000, right? So it looks like now you've got a real identity. Somebody has taken a chance on you to give you a $5,000 loan, a $10,000 loan. Depends on how much you pay, right? So somebody's taken that chance on you, right? So your score goes up, right? And if I'm looking at it, go, well, that's pretty solid, right? That looks better. But it's not enough, right? So now I still have a score of 590. Let's say a credit score of 590. It's still not great. It's still subprime, right? We want to get to near prime. We want to get to prime. We want to look really good, right, when they pull our credit report. So I don't know if you guys are aware of this. This is interesting. Go look it up. Buy trade lines online, right? You will find there's probably 60 sites that allow you to buy these trade lines. And what these trade lines are people who come to the site and say, hey, I've got a Chase card. I've had it for 20 years. It's got a available line of $40,000. I will let you give that to somebody to put it on their credit report as an authorized user, but don't give them my statement. Don't give them my data, right? So basically, it just looks like there's a new trade line on the report, which now, this report, which we created this month, next month, it looks 30 years old. And I've got a credit limit of $30,000. Right? So it's a pretty easy scam to do. Now, the issue is you have to have a strong synthetic model to identify at the front door what's happening, right? And then you have to have a really good step up, right, to identify how do I make sure that I can validate who's synthetic and who's not. Because younger people look synthetic. They have a thin footprint, right? International people, people who have recently immigrated to the country have a thin file, so they look bad, right? So if I wanted to, I could use this name, and what I would do is I would add an I-10, right? Because you get an I-10 when you first come into the country. And so any fraud investigator, when it scores high, fraud investigator is going to look at it and go, oh, Paul he came in, he used his I-10 to get credit, and now he's using his newly established social. And that's going to almost pass every fraud investigation, unless you know what you're doing, right? So these little supply trade lines are pretty good. So now you get a 630, you're near prime. You're set. So who will attack you, right? And so this is where, and I don't have the time to ask like exactly what business are you in, right? But it depends on what business you're in. In synthetic identity, like my motive to create this was to get a job. I wanted to get a job with you, right? And I had felonies, right? So that's what drove me to do a fabricated identity, right? So it's all about motive. So if you look at it, so gig economy, credit card is interesting. We did an analysis following COVID, right? And we wanted to know, how did synthetic fraud change during COVID? Credit card, fabricated and manipulated, both went up, right? So synthetic attacks went up, but it was both by consumers who needed credit and people who wanted to fake stuff, right? And why is that? Economy's down, consumers need credit. You know, they will, do things that are not great sometimes. Auto, You want to manipulate it, right? Half of those are going to pay back, half of those are not, right? Merchant POS, right? So what you have to do is think about what industry you're in. Think about how you're going to be attacked. Think about why somebody would establish a fake relationship with you, right? And then that's likely is what's going to happen. And that's where, it's exciting for me. It's exciting for Socure. It's exciting for me. I'm a fraud nerd, right? And so we love to test, right? And go, hey, let's see, do you have synthetic? You probably do. Do you have a lot? Maybe. Are you being attacked by fabricated or manipulated, right? And so we can tell you that in a proof of concept, and we can tell you that pretty quickly. So it's really cool. So we can tell you, look, here's what's going on. Here's your concerns. You should buy the score. Don't use KYC. A lot of people have been using the term KYC. KYC is more of a compliance solution. KYC solutions, CIP solutions, do not stop synthetic fraud. They do not stop third-party fraud, right? Because if I'm smart, quick story on third-party fraud, if I know that you're going to validate me through my phone number, I'm going to change my phone number only, and all of the other elements are going to be attached to that real person. That's going to pass almost every KYC solution on the planet. Right? So KYC literally does not solve fraud. So you have to use a fraud solution. So, we're Socure, love you to partner with us, but you have to stop synthetic fraud at the front door, right? Now, if you haven't stopped it at the front door, and this is what one of our customers just recently, found out, that also means you have synthetic fraud in your base, right? So this customer who is partnering with us is integrating synthetic up front, and then they're doing a portfolio scrub to basically go, hey, run your score against all of my independent contractors, right? Let me look and see who might be third-party fraud, because people do third-party fraud too. Let me see who might be synthetic, right? And then I can look at that, and I can pull those aside, and I can do some further research on those, right? I can do manual verifications. I can get their social security number, right? Make sure that you validate the document is right. So there's some things you can do, but for me, and I know there's insurance companies too, I'd really be interested, hey, I'm covering these people. Are they doing something from synthetic up front? So that's my thing. I don't know where we are on time, but that's what I wanted to go through. I wanted you guys to understand how you can make a lot of money. Not really. I wanted you to understand, what synthetic fraud is, how easy it is to create it, right? What's the motive, right? And what kind of synthetic am I going to try and attack you with, right? And then ways to stop that fraud.